Yara Hashem panav elecha v'choneka. Yisa Hashem panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom. Those are the three brachot. So if you go ahead and you add a fourth bracha, you have added to the mitzvah. The way the Torah gave you a specific way to go ahead and do a mitzvah. Well, let's say the Torah says, good morning, Jaime.
Morning, Rabbi.
Good morning. The Torah says you should put on tefillin. The Torah says you should, in the tefillin, you have 4 parshiot that you have to put in the tefillin. The parsha of Shema, parsha of V'hayim Shemoah, parsha of Kadesh, V'hayik V'yacha. You know, the minyan over here starts with Kadesh Likol B'chor, right? And then that's written, that's in the tefillin. If a person says, I want to throw in my bar mitzvah parsha into the tefillin as well, I want to throw in something else. So that's called Bal Tosif. You're adding to the mitzvah. So that's that. Also, there's something called Lo Sigra. Torah says, don't add to the mitzvah, don't change the mitzvah by adding to it, and don't change it by subtracting. The person says, I'm going to go ahead and just take 3 out of the 4 species for the lulav. You only took 3, you didn't take 4, you're missing something. So the Torah says that you can't do that. When you have the mitzvah, same thing, it's tefillin. Torah says you have to have 4 parashot of the tefillin. If you put 3 parashot of the tefillin, you would violate it, you didn't do the mitzvah. There's a violation of the mitzvah by making less the mitzvah. Now, yesterday we introduced the idea that according to Rabbi Yehuda, that Rabbi Yehuda holds that you have to tie the lulav with the hadassim and the aravot have to be tied to the lulav. That's an integral part of the mitzvah, even though we do not hold that that's an integral part of the mitzvah. We have our custom is that we do tie it for a different reason, for beautification purposes. But if you hold that it's an integral part of the mitzvah, then if you're going to tie it with some other species, with a rubber band or any other things, that will be like you're adding to the mitzvah. If you put something else into the mix, and that will be a problem. That's what the Gemara introduced yesterday. So now on 31a4, the Gemara now says the following point. We said that Rabbi Yehuda would hold that etrov needs to be hadar, meaning to say the Torah says creates hadar. You have to take a fruit, and the question is, how do we translate through hadar? Hadar has multiple. We're going to see in the Gemara that hadar could mean beautiful, and hadar could also mean some other meaning besides beautiful. It could refer to hadar, that the tree remains from year to year. The fruit remains from year to year, stays on the tree from year to year. We'll see what the word hadar means. But the Gemara said that Rabbi Yehuda, even though when it comes to a lulav, Rabbi Yehuda has a dissenting opinion, and he says a lulav does not have to be beautiful. Meaning, a lulav, if it's dried, Rabbi Yehuda says it's technically kosher if it's a dried lulav, even though you're not doing the mitzvah in the beautiful way, because dried is not the beautiful way, but there's no special, unique mitzvah of beauty when it comes to the lulav. Meaning, the Torah says, let's say the Torah says, I want you to put on tefillin. The Torah didn't tell you have to put on beautiful tefillin. The Torah did not identify the mitzvah of tefillin directly with the idea of beautiful. Because if the Torah would say you have to put on beautiful tefillin, then maybe if your tefillin is old, it won't be and you know doesn't look as so nice. Maybe you wouldn't get credit for the mitzvah. But the fact that Torah did not say that, you will get credit for the mitzvah if you put on old tefillin, even if the writing is not so perfectly neat. It's not that the scribe did not have such a neat handwriting, but if it was done right, if it was written properly, you get credit for the mitzvah of tefillin. You didn't fulfill it's a separate mitzvah, independent of the mitzvah of tefillin. There's a general mitzvah for all mitzvot to beautify a mitzvah, and you missed out on that mitzvah, which is also, by the way, a question. Is that a biblical mitzvah to beautify every mitzvah, or that's a rabbinic mitzvah to beautify every mitzvah? I mean, every mitzvah has this concept of beautification, but it's not to the level that if you don't beautify the mitzvah, You don't make a beautiful sukkah. You made a sukkah, but it's not beautiful. It's an old, rundown. The wood is old. The colors of the wood are bad, are very not nice, and the schach is from 1,000 years ago. You got credit for the mitzvah. You did not do it in the most beautiful fashion. You lost out that concept of beauty, which you're supposed to make a beautiful sukkah. But Rabbi Yehuda, but when it comes to etrog, it's very interesting. Because when the Torah identifies the etrog, it says, good morning, Adam. When the Torah identifies etrog, it says the word hadar. I want you to take for yourself a pre-Eitz hadar. So the fact that the Torah says hadar by the etrog, if hadar means, if we're going to translate the word by etrog, hadar means beautiful, that means the Torah is being very particular about the etrog. It has to be beautiful. And therefore, that would mean an etrog that is dried out will not be good. Even though it's an etrog, but if it's dried out, if it's not beautiful, it won't be good according to that. And that is the opinion of the Chachamim of the Mishnah. And not only the Chachamim hold that if it's dried out by the etrog, it's not good. The Chachamim say that all the four species, even though the Torah writes it by etrog, all four species, if it's not beautiful, if it's dried out, if it does, you don't get credit for the mitzvah. That was the opinion of the Rabbanan. The Rava said that Rabbi Yehuda, who says that a lulav that's dried out would be kosher, because Rabbi Yehuda holds that you don't compare the other three species to the etrog. This idea that if it's beautiful, it has to be beautiful in order to be beautiful the mitzvah, it's specific by etrog. That's how Rava understands, according to Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. It's only that particular requirement of beautification is by etrog and not by the other three species. But Rava says, but when it comes to etrog, everybody's on board that etrog has to be beautiful. That's of course. That's what you say, of course. But we're going to see it might not be so, of course. If it's hadar, but we're going to see there's other translations for the word hadar. Not necessarily it means beautiful. So that's what the Gemara is going to challenge. That's what brings us to today's Gemara, 31a4. Ube etrog mi boy Rabbi Yehuda hadar. When it comes to etrog, does Rabbi Yehuda really hold that etrog has to be hadar? V'hatanya, we learned in a Breita. Listen to this Breita. Arbat minim shebelulav. The four species that are in the lulav. Kishem sheim pochtim mehem. The same way you can't make less than four. Kach ein musifan alehin. Meaning everybody understands. If you don't have, the Torah says four species. But what about if I want to do something more than that? So here the Breita tells you. You can't throw in another thing for good luck. You like apples and oranges, and you want to take that along with the Daled Minim, with the Hadaz. It's no good. You can't add. Now, the Gemara later is going to ask. I mean, obviously, it's not obvious. We have a lot. The Torah itself says you can't add to the mitzvah, and you can't subtract from the mitzvah. So the Gemara is going to deal with this later on. But for our purposes, the Gemara says, it says the same way you can't make less than four, you can't add to four. Lo mata etrog. What happened? You didn't find an etrog. There was no etrog to be found. It's not an easy type of. It's not a common fruit. If you didn't find an etrog, lo yavi lo parish. You can't bring a quince instead. Lo rimon. You can't bring a pomegranate instead of the etrog. V'lo dova acher. And you can't bring a lemon. You can't bring anything. There's no substitute root for the etrog. Don't say that, the Torah says creates, if you want to say the Torah says creates hadar. So maybe the Torah did identify directly what it is. Maybe as long as I have something else that's beautiful, I can go ahead and bring it. No, you can't go ahead and bring anything else. And we'll see the Gemara later on is going to say, what do you mean? Isn't it obvious that the Torah says creates hadar, and it means etrog? Of course you can't bring anything else. We'll see what the Gemara is going to say for that. What about kimushim? If the species, if they were starting to wither, and the species were withering. They're not so moist. They're not completely moist, but they're not completely dry. So it's like in between. Let's say, very good. Now, what are we? That's a good question. What are we talking about? So So for now, we're gonna say that we're talking about the lulav, and the Gemara maybe is going to understand that it's also referring to the etrog. The Gemara see the focus, the context of this statement. It opens up the four species of the lulav. You can't make more, no more, no less. Then it focuses on the etrog, and then it says if it's dry, if it's withered, not dry, right? So right. So let's say we're talking about the lulav. We're gonna translate it for lulav, and we'll see how the Gemara is going to translate it. Or is it referring to all the four species? Kesherim. If it's withering, that's not called dry. Yiveshin pisulim. But if it's dried, if it's completely lost its moisture, then it is puzzle. That's the first opinion, Tanakama. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, af yiveshin kesherim. Rabbi Yehuda says, even yiveshim, even if it's dried, it is kosher. And we're going to, now the question like Ralph would bring up, what is Rabbi Yehuda talking about? Is he talking about the etrog? Or is he talking about just the lulav and the other items, right? Because the Mishnah, this Braita opens up with the four species. It's focused, you can't make more or less than four. Then it moves to the etrog, and then it talks about withering. Withering is going back on the etrog, going back on the all four species. What is it referring to? It's referring to the lulav. What is the withering and the drying referring to? Okay, we're gonna see how what the Gemara is gonna say. Is it specifically referring to the lulav, or it's even referring to the etrog? If it's referring to the etrog, and then it says if it's withering, it's kosher, but if it's dried, it's no good. Rabbi Yehuda says it's kosher, so that means Rabbi Yehuda is saying that an etrog is kosher, even if it's dry, which would show that it doesn't have to be beautiful, right? This statement, Ralph, that you're pointing out, that if it's dry, if it's withering, it's good, and if it's dry, it's no good. If it's referring to the etrog as well, if it's referring to all four species, then Rabbi Yehuda is saying that all four species, even if it's totally dry, it's still kosher. And that would challenge Rava's opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Now, for Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yehuda has a fascinating story. Now we're turning the page. Masah v'bnei krachin. It was a story with the city people. The city people live in a place where it's not common to find lulavim, find etrogim. They're very far from the fields, and therefore there's the lulavim. The lulavim, the palm trees, are not commonly found. So what do they do in such places? And they're not, and it seems that they're not able to ship to these places and to import to these places the lulav. So shehayu morishim et lulavehem livnei b'nehem. When they would pass away, they would give over, they would bequeath to their children, to their grandchildren, their lulav. They're like, what is one of the things that people, after they pass away, person passes away, there's an inheritance that the children or grandchildren. What was some of the things that the lulav was part of the thing? Meaning that the lulav, because it was a rarity item to have a lulav, they went ahead and that was one of the things that they would give over to the descendants, was the lulav. Now for what purpose? That lulav to use for the mitzvah. If their children or grandchildren will not find other lulavim, now they would go ahead and use the lulav of grandpa. And grandpa's lulav is 50 years old, 30 years old. They would use that lulav. So it's totally dry. It's a dry lulav. You ever see they put the lulav on the Aron Kodesh? Some places, some Ashkenaz shuls, it's a custom. A lot of them they throw they put the lulav, they adorn the Aron Kodesh. They try to maybe for beautification purposes with the lulav, and then they use it they burn it with the chametz on Pesach time. Right? you want to keep it nice and moist. That's beautification. That's what you want to do. So so therefore Rabbi Yehuda says to the rabbis, you say that if a lulav is dried out, it's invalid. We have history. We have historical the cities they used to leave over the, and you know what? The rabbis didn't say, "What are you doing?" The rabbis didn't protest against this practice. That means this practice was a fine practice. No one said boo, whatever the expression is about it. So therefore, I'm proving you. I want to prove to you from the actions that happen. Now a lot of times, when you see something, sometimes you see someone do something, not necessarily is it the way you see it. You might interpret it that the reason for this is A, but maybe it's really B. Meaning your understanding with the fact that they use these lulavim that were handed over to their grandchildren, that means a dry lulav is good. So the rabbis are going to say back, not necessarily. Even though they used it, it was for a different purpose. It was just that the people shouldn't forget about the mitzvah of lulav. They should go ahead and remember that there is such a thing called a lulav. If you're going to go ahead and not, if they wouldn't take a lulav at all, then they wouldn't be in the practice of doing the mitzvah the way it's to know that there's a mitzvah, proper mitzvah of lulav. So therefore, he says, Misham Amru Lo. So the rabbi said back, Misham Raya, you want to bring a proof from over there? Yes. Amalehem Amru. Yes. So and they see the aleph. The aleph says Amru Lo. It's not lahem because really why it's the parentheses because there's a discussion between the rabbis and Rabbi Yehuda. So it should say the singular. They said to him, not they said to them. Or there's a different. It would sound like that was the text, and it was that text was the printer made a mistake by putting in lahem, but it's not. It's a discussion between the rabbis and Rabbi Yehuda. So it say Amru Lo. They said to him, Misha. That's why the Mesoras Hashas says you need to say lo. You have to change the lahem to lo. But they don't want to touch it. They found it that way. Maybe you'll figure something else out. But until we find out, we're going to say it's low. It's to him. Right. That's what the Gemara is saying. In days of old, you didn't have all the transportation that you have today, the ability to import to certain places, and also you don't know certain places. Certain places you have. It's easier to import things. You live near the sea. And there's certain places that that you live. You have no seas nearby or whatever it is, and you're far away. What? Right, so you have to import. Most probably they import from other places. So by the way, there were some places most probably that they had one lulav and etrog for the whole town. You know what I'm saying? And I think even right. So Amru Lo Misham Raya. You want to bring a proof from that situation? Ein Shat Hatchat Raya. You can't bring a proof from something that happened in a very difficult circumstance. Meaning that was called a Shat Hatchat. Shat Hatchat means when you were very pressed. You're extenuating circumstances. A very good way to say it. Extenuating circumstances. They did not. When they had no other lulavim, so that's why they use a dry lulav, and you can't prove from over there. Now the question really, so now how do we understand this Gemara? If it's extenuating circumstances and a lulav is invalid, so what is a dry lulav? Meaning the Chacham is saying this lulav is 100%. It's dry lulav, and we say a dry lulav is not kosher, right? That's the opinion we have on record right here. A dispute between Rabbanan and Rabbi Yehuda. The Rabbanan say a dried lulav, no good, and they say same thing. A dried etrog, hadassim, haravot. Dry, if it reached the level, whatever will I have to identify. Let's say for a lulav, we'll identify if it's completely white. Well, that's how we'll translate it for today. That's dry. The Chacham say no good. It is invalid. It's not good. So you can't use it. Right. Max. But when it comes to, but in the case when you have no other lulav, we say the Rabbanan say you use this lulav. Now, is it now that you lose the lulav? Are you getting credit for the mitzvah? No, you're not getting credit for the mitzvah. You are just doing it to, like I mentioned before, just to keep things flowing, so that when you have the ability to get a lulav, you'll know about the mitzvah of lulav. You'll know that the lulav is something you need to take on the holiday. So this is a matter of discussion, fascinating discussion in the commentaries, of understanding what does it mean when you have no other lulav and the lulav is dry. And in general, a dry lulav would be invalid because it does not fulfill the criteria of hadar, because we compared lulav to etrog. In the same way etrog has to be beautiful, the lulav has to also be beautiful. So how do we understand now that what is being accomplished by taking this dried lulav? That is the question. So even dry, the Chacham said dry is no good, but when you're stuck, you have no other lulav by dry lulav, you use a dry lulav. Point the Chacham. No, Rabbi Yehuda, the Chacham are saying that. But the Chacham are saying that the story that you, Rabbi Yehuda says dried is always technically okay. If you have nothing, if you use dry, you get the mitzvah. But the question is, according to the Chachamim, did they get credit? Did they get a biblical mitzvah? Did they get credit for the mitzvah of lulav? So the first opinion of the Ravid understands, well, no, they don't get credit for the mitzvah because they didn't do it the way the mitzvah. There's a requirement. It has to be, it can't be dry. So the Ravid says they don't get credit. Well, the fact that they did it not necessarily means they got credit for the mitzvah, like we said before. Now he says that's the opinion of the Ravid. They did it. You shouldn't forget the concept that you have of something called the lulav. I mean, you had the other three species. Yeah, even if you can't get a proper one, it's not that you take a different species. So that for that time period, that would be a rabbinic mitzvah. You would have a rabbinic mitzvah, just like we have a mitzvah on Pesach. We say Zeichel and Mikdash Kehilel, or we have a mitzvah on lulav, the other 6 days of the holiday. On a Torah level, you have to take a lulav one day. And today, right? We have a mitzvah one day. In the time of the Beit HaMikdash, in the Mikdash itself, they would take the lulav. If you buy the Beit HaMikdash, you take it for 7 days. So in order to remember that, not to forget that, we take a lulav for 7 days. So therefore, the same way we have that mitzvah, rabbinic mitzvah, lulav, so like Adam said, there'll be a rabbinic mitzvah will kick in now, that you go to the rabbi say, Rabbi, we have no lulav, only from our grandpa. The rabbi say, take that lulav. That's what you're supposed to do. Because you have to remember that there is this mitzvah of lulav. That's a good. So logically, it should hold true based on what we're saying. For estrog, it should be the same thing. So let's see. But that's the opinion of the Ravid. Now, one second. We're going to now. The Rush has an amazing idea. The Rush says that the Rush is one of the Rishonim. He says, it's Rabbeinu Asher, the language of the Gemara implies, when the Gemara says, you can't bring a proof from Shatat Chat. You can't bring a proof from extenuating circumstances. Sounds like that when you have extenuating circumstances, you use this lulav and you would get credit for the lulav. You hear that, Max? That the language, like a lot of times you find in the Gemara, the idea that you say extenuating circumstances, you use it. What does it sound like? It sounds like you use it and you don't get credit, or you use it and you will actually get credit for this mitzvah, and maybe even on a Torah level. And he's of the opinion that you see the first question also. He said you would be able to say a bracha on this lulav, and you'll say a bracha. So now the question is, so now the obvious question is, if the fact that it's extenuating circumstances, but how does it change the law? If the law of the Torah is that you have to go ahead and use there's something called it has to be hadar. It can't be dry. How could it be? Because I'm extenuating circumstances that dry works. That we never, we don't say, extenuating circumstances, there's a certain law that you have to go ahead and have a certain type of schach. You have to have schach has to be grown from the ground. Has to originate from the ground. We don't say, okay, extenuating circumstances, okay, you could use something else and get credit for it. There's no such thing. So, Max, you hear the point. How is it that extenuating circumstances would change? Listen to what he says, the following. Because the Torah did not openly identify the disqualifications of lulav. Rather, the Torah gave to the Chachamim the keys to set up what does it mean hadar. When the Torah says hadar, when the Torah says you have to take something beautiful, right? So if the Torah itself, if Hashem would say, you know what, beautiful, not dry. So then, and there's no, the Torah would say openly, I want it, then it would be, you can't, it doesn't make a difference what kind of extenuating circumstance. But the fact is the Torah gave over to the Chachamim the power to say how to explain and how to apply this law of beautification of the etrog, the beautification of the lulav. And the Chachamim said, it's a very similar concept you find by where by Chalamoid Pesach. Moshe, it's great to see you. Ruchim Habayim. It says, but when it comes to Chalamoid Pesach, intermediate days of Pesach, there's a whole discussion in halacha. What are you allowed to do and what are you not allowed to do? And the Torah did not clearly identify. Now, some say that work on a Chalamoid is a biblical prohibition. If you're going to go ahead and build a building on Chalamoid for your personal use, so some say that's a biblical prohibition. On Chalamoid, you shouldn't be taking your tractor and trailer and doing such work and digging and building. But the Torah, but which type of activities are forbidden on Chalamoid was given to the rabbis to identify which things would be considered are called a melacha. Meaning most laws of the Torah is that Hashem gave the Torah with an explanation, and that explanation was given at Sinai, and it clearly identifies what the laws and the details of the mitzvah are. But when it came to Chalamoed, according to that understanding, the Torah was not specific about what work you can't do. I give it over to you, the rabbis, to identify it. So this is the way the Rosh understands Hadar when it comes to the etrog, the lulav, that the application of what to identify what's called beautiful, or how to apply the principle of beautiful would depend on how the rabbis want to. Well, and if the rabbis say yes, right. So right. So there's going to be certain things that right. So that's when the halacha Ralph is going to say, if it's completely dry, right, but there's certain things that are clearly we have to identify that. Right. There's certain things that are purely. But if it's complete, if the lulav is white and not gray, we know it's white. Then we know it's completely white. It's not beautiful. It's clearly not beautiful. So that, and therefore, the Rosh says.
You want to take it out.
So he says like this. The invalidation of the lulav are not written in the Torah openly. What will invalidate the lulav? It was given to the rabbis to set the laws of what's called hadar. And the rabbi said that if something is dried, in general, a dried lulav, when you have the ability to get a kosher lulav, when you have ability to have a proper lulav that's not dried, then the rabbis say you do not get credit if you use a dry lulav. But we're saying it was given to the rabbis to with the ability to say when is it considered, when does the hadar, when it has to be hadar, and when it doesn't have to. When does hadar? How do you apply hadar? So okay, so that's another. So there's two understandings in the Rishonim. Maybe there's more, but we're saying two understanding of the early commentators. According to the Chachamim, when you have no other lulav but a dried out lulav, would you get credit? And you're going to use a dried out lulav, will you get credit on a Torah level? Or you're not really getting credit at all for the mitzvah, but we just want you to be remembering how they did it when you had a kosher lulav, in order that you should be trained to focus on getting a kosher lulav in the future when you have the abilities. So now back to the Gemara. Tani Mihas, you want to say something, Adam? Yes, let's see what you want to say.
This is a bit of another interpretation.
Talk a little louder.
I think maybe what's also hadar, what makes that lulav hadar is the fact that it was inherited, and the fact that people went through Mesirat Nefesh to inherit a lulav, not like anything, not like valuable like gold. They inherited a lulav. I think that's what makes this lulav hadar also.
Yeah, that's a nice. It's a nice thing, but I don't know if it was only if it was inherited. Even if they didn't inherit it, if there's no other lulav and they found it dried out lulav, it would also apply. It's a nice idea. Okay, so now back to the Gemara. So the Gemara says, Tani Mihat. But we learned, Tani Mihat, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Afi Veshin Kisherim. Rabbi Yehuda says that even if it's dried, it is kosher. My love, isn't it a etrog? Isn't it also going on the etrog, that even if the etrog is dry, you would get credit? And therefore the Gemara, one of Gary and one of Mr. Rapport, the Gemara is proving that maybe Rabbi Yehuda's opinion is that even an etrog you could get credit if it's dried out. The issue of our Gemara here is the rabbis hold if an etrog is dried out, it's not kosher. It's no good. And of course, the halacha is going to have to define what's called dried out. What's the level of dried out? But when it's considered dried out, the etrog is not kosher. Rabbi Yehuda goes on record by a lulav, and he says a lulav that's dried out is kosher. But so they're arguing about a lulav, if a lulav is dried out is kosher or not. But Rava says, Rabbi Yehuda, who says a lulav, if it's dried out, is kosher, will say an etrog will not be kosher. He will admit that etrog is different. Everybody would hold an etrog, right? Gary, etrog that's dried out, no good. Why? Because the Torah says creates hadar. It has to be beautiful, and if it's dried out, it lacks beauty, and therefore it's not kosher. But the Gemara challenged this understanding because we have a Braita that talks about the four species, and it mentions in the Braita the idea that if it's dried out, it is invalid, and it says that Rabbi Yehuda says if it's dried out, it would be kosher, which seems to indicate that it's also going on the etrog. And the Gemara says no. That part of the Braita where it says that if it's withered, that it's dried out, Rabbi Yehuda says it's kosher, that's going on the lulav. Lo, the Gemara says it's going on lulav. It's only going on the lulav. That we have. Don't interpret the statement of Rabbi Yehuda that it says if it's dried out, it's kosher. It's also going on all four things. It's specifically it's going on the lulav. It's going on the hadassim, the aravot. But Rabbi Yehuda would hold the etrog would have to be beautiful. It can't be dried out. That's what the Gemara wants to say at this point. But again, you're going to see the Mishnayot are going to say that the Chachamim, which is the majority opinion, and the law follows the Chachamim, says that if it's dried out, it's not kosher. The lulav, the etrog, the adasim, that rabbi.
Rabbi, does
Now-
it end up specifying what a dried out etrog is?
It's gonna. Our Gemara today is not going, and we're gonna get to it. It's gonna
And
have
it does
to
get to that conclusion?
Yeah, well, I mean, for sure the halacha is going to say whether the Gemara is going to identify exactly what's called dried out or not. I'm not sure if the Gemara translates for us dried out. For sure the halacha will translate it. Just like the halacha says, that a lulav that's dried out means if it's white. If it's completely white, there's no green, there's no freshness, that's called dried out. We'll see how we'll get to the etrog, exactly what level would be considered a dried out etrog. Omar. So the Gemara says, the Gemara is now going to talk about the idea that you're not allowed to add to a mitzvah, and you're not allowed to diminish from a mitzvah. And we're just going to end with one point. We know there are a lot of, we have a mitzvah called Hanukkah is coming up. The mitzvah of Hanukkah, the Torah has no mitzvah called Hanukkah. The Torah doesn't obligate every person to light a menorah. So how could the rabbis add to the Torah? Many mitzvot that the rabbis place on us, Hanukkah, Purim, washing your hands, Natilat Yadayim in the morning, washing before you have bread, saying brachot before you eat, these are all rabbinic enactments. So how could the rabbis add to the Torah? So the basic answer is, if the rabbis would tell you that saying a bracha before you eat is a biblical obligation, the rabbis would tell you lighting the menorah is a biblical obligation, that's adding to the Torah. The rabbis are saying we're creating a rabbinic obligation. If we would say that the Torah tells you to do this, that would be you're adding to the Torah. There is no mitzvah, there's no 614 mitzvah. There's no mitzvah on the Torah that we should light a menorah. But the rabbis are saying rabbinically you have a mitzvah. But the Torah says to listen to the rabbis, don't turn away from what the rabbis say. So therefore, when we light the menorah, we say Asher Kiddeshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lahadlik ner shachanaka. But where did Hashem command us? How do we say Asher Kiddeshanu b'mitzvotav? There's no mitzvah in the Torah to light Chanukah. There's no mitzvah in the Torah to read Megillat Esther. So how do you say Asher Kiddeshanu b'mitzvotav? So the answer the Gemara says, because since the Torah says don't turn away from what the rabbis say, so therefore when you go in and you light the menorah, you are following that mitzvah of the Torah, of not moving away from the rabbis say, and therefore that's why we're going to say the bracha, Asher Kiddeshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu. So in a sense, God commanded us to light the menorah. How did God command us? Because He told us to listen to the rabbis. And that's why we could go ahead, that's why we could say that bracha, Asher Kiddeshanu b'mitzvotav. The same way we say that before we put on tie our tefillin. Before we tie tefillin, we say Asher Kiddeshanu, God commands to put on tefillin. God commands on Chanukah menorah through the rabbis. Because the rabbis told us that was what we should do. So then you get, it's a rabbinic holiday, but you get a fulfillment of a biblical mitzvah of listening to the rabbis. Have a great day, everybody. Have a beautiful Shabbat. Thank you for joining.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.